Maryland football lets us down again.
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day, and video content creator for 247 Sports and InsideMarylandSports.com. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Testing my skills on PrizePicks this football season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege for a first-time deposit. The Terps suffered their worst loss of the season. It's the worst loss in a while. Someone in the comment section of my post-game show said it's the worst loss since last week against Illinois, or 2 weeks ago since Illinois, since the bye week was in between. And I kind of agree with that and disagree with that. It's definitely a worse loss than the Illinois game. The Illinois game was a terrible loss, but I could kind of get behind the Illinois loss and say it was okay that we lost to Illinois, and that Illinois is a pretty good team. Preseason, a lot of people thought they were going to be a top 25 team. They were receiving more votes than us. They're a pretty talented team. They have some really good players. They have NFL players along their defensive line. They got one of the best receivers in the country. But losing to this Northwestern team is just a whole nother level of a terrible loss. It's one of the worst Maryland football losses of Coach Locksley's era. It might be the worst loss of Coach Locksley's era. I'm going to go ahead and say it is the worst loss of the Mike Locksley era for the Maryland Terrapins. It was an absolute abysmal performance. All phases of our team, offense, defense, coaching, special teams wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't great either. So every single phase of our football team, a terrible performance, horrible performance against a Northwestern team that we had no business. I don't care home, I don't care away, I don't care neutral site, I don't care if we play in another country. We have no business. If we compare roster to roster on paper, but the game's not played on paper. But if we compare roster to roster on paper and all the talent that we have compared to what they have and what they've had to go through, there is no reason in the world that we should have lost to that team. We should beat that team 19 out of 20 times. We should beat that team almost every day of the week. We should beat that Northwestern team. And that's why I say it's one of the worst losses in the Coach Locksley era and one of the worst Maryland football losses ever, to be honest. Because I thought this was the most talented team that Coach Locksley has had. And it might be. It still might be. You have to remember, talent and what you have on paper is completely different than what actually happens. We see so many teams, college football, NFL, NBA, college basketball, whatever sport you like, soccer, MLB. We see so many teams that are more talented that don't win the games or can't ever accomplish quite what people think they should be able to accomplish. Like the Chargers, for example. They're 2-4 right now, and they have Justin Herbert, and a lot of people look at the coaching staff, but they have all the talent in the world. They got a ton of talent on offense. They got a ton of talent on defense. They can't figure it out. Are we going to look at the Terps this way? We're not. I wouldn't say we're one of the most talented teams in the country, but this is the best team that Coach Locksley has had, I still think, in terms of talent. But like they say, the game's not played on paper. So overall, it's just when you have so much more talent and you think that we would have the coaching advantage. If you remember, to start the season, Northwestern's head coach was out after a scandal. They had to go through adversity, real adversity, where their head coach is out. And the guy that recruited a lot of those guys, the guys that the coach that promised their families that he would take care of their kids. That guy is gone because of different scandals and different things he was doing that were not right. So they had to go through that before the season started. And they put together, it's not a good season, but they are able to battle through it and get a couple of wins. But there's no way this Maryland team should have lost to this Northwestern team. If we look at the scores of past Northwestern games, they lost to Rutgers 27-7. Lost to Duke 38-14. Lost to Howard 20-23, or beat Howard 20-23. But Howard is not good. Howard isn't a good team. So if you look at their scores, they're not impressive at all. And so that's why I think it's one of our worst losses. This Northwestern team isn't very good. It's just not very good at all. But somehow we got outcoached. We got outplayed on offense. We got outplayed on defense. We were favored by 13.5 points for a reason. Those guys in Vegas know what they're doing when they're making those lines. There's a reason we were a 13.5 point favorite. I was wondering why the line kept coming down. It was at like 14.5, then it was down to 13.5. Road favorites, 13.5 point road favorites. So if we were at home, I don't know what the line would have been. It might have been up to like 15, 16, 17 points. 13.5 road favorites means you're straight up better than that team, and you should not lose to this team. But we found a way to lose. That's why it's one of our worst losses in a while. 13.5 point favorites on the road. It's a terrible loss to take to a Northwestern team. And maybe the most disappointing thing about all of this, we're coming off a bye. We're supposed to be rested physically. We're supposed to be ready to go. We're supposed to come together and self-scout and thinking that we figured out why we were on a 2-game losing streak against Ohio State and why we lost to Illinois. That's why I thought we would cover the spread. I thought we would come after the bye, and we did a really good job of looking at ourselves in the mirror and say, we didn't do these things well. We didn't cover well here. We're not running the ball here well enough. We're not hitting that gap right there. Talia, we're not making that read there. And we're going to be able to, I thought we were going to be able to correct some things. If anything, we've continuously regressed since the Ohio State game. And that's kind of hard to say because the Ohio State game, you could have looked at multiple ways. You could have looked at it as we were in the game with Ohio State, and if Talia doesn't throw 2 picks, who knows what could have happened. Maybe we don't win, but that could have been a 1-possession game down the stretch. Or you could have looked at it as, dang, we're not very good. We just got lucky in the first half. I looked at it the first way. I looked at it as a positive, and I looked at it as we should have been in the game with Ohio State, and we missed opportunities. So I was confident after the Ohio State loss. I still had us on an upward trajectory when we were 5-1. But now the Illinois loss, we started to come down. I made some excuses after the Illinois loss. I was like, okay, we just came after the Ohio State week. We're probably physically tired. It's hard to come back after you just lose a tough game like that. But still, I was still disappointed. And now the Northwestern loss, it just hit another block in the road. By far the worst loss of the season. By far the worst loss of the season. And I'm going to say it's the worst loss of Coach Loxley era. But coming off of a bye, Coach Loxley is he's terrible coming off of a bye. He doesn't win games coming off of a bye. He doesn't. So what does that tell me? Something needs to change. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about stuff that needs to change. But coming off a bye, Coach Loxley doesn't win. Credit to Northwestern. They outcoached us. That's another reason it's a horrible loss. This is an interim head coach. This isn't a real head coach. And he had them more ready to play, more hyped up to play. The energy wasn't there for us. And I don't know where we go from here. It's a terrible loss. For us to get outcoached, outplayed, outperformed, out everything against a Northwestern football team that was picked to be one of the worst in the Big Ten. And I said they were one of the worst Power 5 teams. And I still kind of I can't say that's true anymore, but they kind of were in terms of their talent and as a collective. They were one of the worst teams in Power 5. We lost to them, though. It's one of the worst losses in Maryland Terrapin football in the last 10 years, for sure. Northwestern outplayed the Terps in almost all categories. We get more into that after this message from the Athletic Brewing Company. Now it's time for your Game Changer of the Week, brought to you by the Athletic Brewing Company. Much like Talia Tungaviola, Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. You don't have to worry about hangovers. I've talked to many people in the Locked On community, and they say they taste great. They're the fastest growing non-alcoholic brewery in the U.S., so get on board. You can find Athletic Brewing Co.'s non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use Locked On to get 15% off your first online order. That's Locked On at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer. Exclusion and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy and is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all parts you need at all the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusion apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. The Maryland Terrapins got outplayed almost everywhere. We touched on it a little bit in the last segment, but I'm going to go ahead and go through it, and you're going to really understand. We got outplayed really everywhere. Quarterback, Talia Tungaviola versus Brendan Sullivan, a guy that has every single Maryland Terp record, passing yards, passing touchdowns, top 10 in the Big Ten in terms of passing yards, recently just passed Trace McSorley, is a Maryland great, has changed the program, starting quarterback for the Maryland Terrapins, Talia Tungaviola, versus Brendan Sullivan, who didn't even win the job at Northwestern. Couldn't win the job at Northwestern. Keep in mind, a Northwestern team that hasn't had good quarterback play this year at all. Brendan Sullivan hasn't played a really good game. This was his first really good game. And he's straight up in a duel between a backup quarterback who's getting his chance and an all-time Maryland great. Northwestern's backup quarterback wins the battle. Brendan Sullivan goes 16 of 23 for 265 yards, 2 touchdowns, 14 carries for 56 yards. Talia goes 30 of 47 for 274 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 turnovers. He had the pick, and he also had when the ball slipped out. Talia had 10 more passing yards, but guess what he did? He threw the ball 47 times to Brendan Sullivan's 23 times. Almost more than double. He threw the ball almost more than double the times that Sullivan threw the ball, and threw the ball for 10 more yards. Northwestern was so much more efficient and had a much better, more balanced game plan that I've been yelling and screaming that the Maryland Terrapins need to have. We rely on Talia all the time to throw the ball so many times. He leads the Big Ten in passing attempts, and he threw the ball 47 times against this Northwestern team. And you could say it's because we're behind and we had to throw the ball to get back in it, But at the end of the day, it seems like every single week, Talia throwing the ball so many times. When are we going to be able to rely on the run game? I'll get into the run game a little bit later. Stick around for that because you'll be surprised to hear the numbers of the run game. Throwing the ball 47 times. But the big difference, Talia did have 3 touchdowns. I'll give him that. But Brendan Sullivan, the big difference between Talia and Sullivan in that game was the turnovers. Sullivan didn't turn it over. Talia turned it over twice. On the pick on the last drive where he absolutely overthrew Corey Dyches, and I'm not sure if that was a pick, but I'm going to agree and say there wasn't undisputable evidence to overturn it. So I'm not going to be like, we got robbed and that wasn't a pick, because there wasn't enough evidence to overturn it, and that is the rule. Maybe I'm mad about it, maybe I'm not, but that's the rule. And you can't throw 2 interceptions in a game that close. Brendan Sullivan didn't throw any. He didn't turn over the ball. Remember when the Maryland Terrapins defense was able to force a ton of turnovers? That's a thing in the past. Remember we were top 2 in the country in turnover margin? That's not true anymore. But another thing that he absolutely did to tear us apart was the 56 rushing yards. That killed us. Sullivan outgained every single one of our running backs. I'll say that again. He outgained Roman Hemby. He outgained Anton Littleton. He outgained Colby McDonald. Every single one of our running backs, Brendan Sullivan outgained them in terms of his rushing yards. Sullivan outplayed Talia. It's pretty simple. It's hard to win when their quarterback doesn't throw any turnovers and also has a really good game and outplays our quarterback. It's going to be hard to win the game like that. They also created bigger plays, which might have been the most surprising thing. Obviously, the play of Sullivan was surprising, but they created more bigger plays than us, because I sat here and directly said, and I was completely wrong. I'll admit I was completely wrong, because I had said that the Terps wide receivers, they have a deeper room, and we're able to create bigger plays in terms of longer receptions, in terms of bigger chunk plays. The Terps wide receivers are going to be able to create bigger plays than the Northwestern wide receivers. The complete opposite actually happened. Northwestern wide receivers had a couple of really big plays. Joseph Hyman had the 53-yard reception. A.J. Henning had a 34-yard reception. And Cam Johnson had a 34-yard reception. All 3 of those guys played for Northwestern with over 33-yard receptions for them. So 3 guys had longer receptions than any Maryland Terrapin. Our longest reception was 24 yards. So 3 guys on their team had longer receptions than any guys on our team. You're not going to win like that. They created the bigger plays. They created the chunk plays, and we were forced to drive the ball down the field more methodically. And it's harder to do that. You're more bound to make a mistake. You're more bound for the ball to slip out your hand. Our defense allowed the big chunk plays, our defense allowed big chunk plays against us. And that leads me to our defense. Gosh, our defense was terrible. It was terrible. The thing was, if this was Ohio State or if this is Michigan and J.J. McCarthy, I'm like, okay, it's not a terrible game. But this is Northwestern. This team can barely score any points. They put up 20 points to Howard, 7 against Rutgers, 14 against Duke. This team can't score the ball. And we allowed them to kind of go off against us. Their quarterback to have a breakout game. Their receivers who create chunk plays. Their defense, or our defense, got outplayed by their defense. I mean, Talia still had a good bit of yards, but for throwing the ball 46 times or 47 times, you're going to have a good amount of yards. So our defense definitely got outplayed. Maryland averaged 5.3 yards per play, while Northwestern averaged 5.8. So they outgained us in terms of yards per play. At the end of the day, Northwestern, we actually outgained them in total yards, but that's because I think we ran more plays. But in terms of on a play-to-play basis, Northwestern did outgain the Terps. They also had 6 sacks compared to only our 5, which isn't a huge difference. But for them to get 6 sacks on us, it's concerning. It's concerning for sure. This Northwestern defensive line is nothing special. For them to get 6 sacks is concerning. And special team, they also had the big return on the 61-yard return. So we're looking at almost every single part of the game. Northwestern outplayed us. Quarterback play, receiver play, defensive play, our secondary versus their secondary. We straight up got outplayed. And I don't know exactly who we blamed that on, the players, the coaching staff, the scheme, or all of it together. But Northwestern clearly outplayed us. It's time we talk about some positives of the game. There's not a whole lot of them, but let's touch on some good stuff to end on a good note. I'll tell you about the positives in the game and the players that played pretty well after this ad from PrizePicks. Testing my skills on PrizePicks this football season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. PrizePicks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. We're the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LOCKEDONCollege for a first-time deposit. Let's talk about some of the positives of the game. Like I said, there weren't very many of them, but I think the biggest positive was our running back room. It's so underutilized. It's just annoying at times. And I know sometimes we don't run the ball well, but we knew coming into this game, Northwestern couldn't stop the run. And they couldn't, actually. We didn't really run the ball, but they couldn't. Guess what Colby McDonald did again? Colby McDonald. Every single time it feels like he has a good game. I know he's been a little bit quiet these last couple of weeks, but he still averaged over 7 yards per carry. And guess what Colby McDonald did on his 5 carries he got? 5 carries for 43 yards, and he averaged 8.6 yards per carry. He needs more carries. We want to be so, I don't even know the word to explain it. We want to rotate and give everyone a chance, which honestly, when you're 5-3, I don't hate it. At this point, it was a little bit different when we're 5-1, and I thought we had a real chance to do something. But now that we're 5-3 and we're just trying to get to a bowl game, I don't hate playing so many guys. But Colby McDonald deserves more carries. He's outplaying everyone in the running back room. 5 carries for 43 yards with an 8.6 average. There's nothing else to say except for he needs more carry. Hemby quietly played really well. 4 rushes for 27 yards with a 6.8 yards per carry. 4 rushes for Roman Hemby. 4 rushes. I hate Josh Gaddis's play calling. Why does Hemby have 4 rushes in the entire game? This game wasn't that much of a blowout where Hemby should have had 4 rushes. And it's from the start. It's like we cannot run the ball. We just won't do it. And I understand we have Talia and we have weapons on the outside. But sometimes it's okay for us to run the ball more than we pass. I don't know if it'll ever happen. Or to make it just somewhat more balanced. Hemby averaged 6.8 yards per carry and Colby McDonald averaged 8.6. And they got absolutely no carries. It has to change, Gaddis. I don't know what else to say. It's a clearly larger sample size that when Talia throws the ball almost 50 times a game, he's bound to make some type of mistake, or it's hard to win the game like that. And I know sometimes you have to because you're down and you have to throw the ball. But you cannot tell me we have to throw the ball 47 times a game and Roman Hemby can only get 4 carries. It's just on first down, run the ball sometimes. I'm not one to love the run on 2nd and 10, but sometimes run the ball on first down. Sometimes run the ball on 2nd down. We're probably easy to play right now because the pass rushers, for one, can definitely get upfield. That's one of the reasons why they get a lot of sacks on us, because they're not worried about stopping the run. They can get upfield and rush the passer as much as they want because, okay, maybe we'll run the ball 1 or 2 times, but we won't run it that much. So the pass rushers can easily get up the field, and it's easier to stop our passing game. Jaysean Jones had way too many drops, but he still had 9 receptions for 78 yards, which is a solid game. And then Caden Prather also had the big end-around play and had 3 catches for 53 yards. So not a horrible performance from those guys. The drops are way too many, though. Those definitely need to be cleaned up. And then Gametime, Barham in the linebacker spot, and Hippolyte made some plays, I thought. Hippolyte had a sack. And Trey Colbert had 2 sacks. That was big. Those are a couple of positives from the game, and there weren't very many more, to be honest. Maryland moves to 5-3. Can't wait for basketball season. But that's all we have for today. We're going to be talking about football, basketball every single day for the Maryland Terrapins. But please make sure you like and subscribe. And thank you for listening to Locked on Terps.